Filipino identity did not exist in a vacuum. It was formed in a storm of meaning. So what does this statement mean? Our identity as Filipinos is not separated from outside events or influences. Instead, we became Filipinos because of these events and the different influences of our colonizers. One of which is the Cadiz Constitution, which is a political influence. So what is the Cadiz Constitution? The Cadiz Constitution is a liberal constitution promulgated in Cadiz in March 1812. When we say liberal, it focuses on change, on reform instead of having absolute monarchy. They want to have a constitutional monarchy, which is the powers of the king is limited. Not like before that all of the powers of the government will be handled by the king, but now it is limited. It is called as a constitutional or limited monarchy. It was drafted by elected representatives and was put in practice in almost all of the areas of the Hispanic monarchy, still under the control of the Spanish crown. Don't be confused when we say Hispanic. When you say Hispanic, it's Hispanish, okay? It is also the first constitution in Europe to deal with national sovereignty as coming from the people and not from the king. That is what I'm telling you a while ago. Instead of having an absolute monarchy, they will be having constitutional monarchy wherein there is still democracy. That's good, but it's far different from the democracy that Filipinos are experiencing as well as in America. Next is the Cadiz Constitution in the Philippine context. So because Cadiz Constitution was already promulgated and it was implemented, we the Filipinos have our first delegates who took office in Madrid because we will now have representations of ourselves. It was actually Pedro Perez and Jose Manuel. These two Filipinos were the first delegates from the Philippines to represent us. And what made this representation is actually the Cadiz Constitution. So the Cadiz Constitution, which was formally implemented in Manila soon after, first established the principles of universal male suffrage. So in this time, in 1812, there will be suffrage. There will be election, but who can vote is only the male. The second is national sovereignty. It is having freedom of the geographical location of a certain state. Third is constitutional monarchy, just like what I've said a while ago. There is limit when it comes to the power of the king, of the monarch. Instead of having all the powers of the government, it will be limited based on what is written in the Constitution. Fourth is the freedom of the press, which is very important because the press is actually the third sector of the government. It checks what the government is doing. And the last one, advocated land reform and free enterprise. This is very good in order to improve the economical aspect not only of the Spanish people as well as the colonies of Spain before. Let's now go on to the existence of racial hierarchy within the Philippines. Before that, let me show you first an image of the racial hierarchy in the Philippines. So these are the different races wherein the Peninsulares is the highest level of the racial hierarchy and the Negrito is the lowest racial hierarchy in the Philippines. Why did this racial hierarchy existed? I have here three concepts that could help us understand why this hierarchy existed: the distinctions, demographics, and divide and conquer. Distinctions. These are the differences in social functions and participation. Demographics. The Spaniards were a very small minority. In the 1st century, Spaniards were numerically small, that it seemed they did not exist even though they belonged to prominent race. Divide and conquer. By the time the revolution broke out in 1896, The Spanish presence in the Philippines had been around for over 330 years. Spain made a scattered group of islands with an equally diverse group of people, distinct geographic unit. The people were separated by geography, language, culture, religion, and etc., who were originally considered as Filipinos. The Indios, naturales or natives, were originally considered as Filipinos. When Ferdinand Magellan set foot on what he called the Islas de San Lazaro in 1521, there was no such thing as the Philippines and no such thing as Filipinos. Back to 1492, when Christopher Columbus mistook America for India, he labeled the red-skinned inhabitants of the so-called New World Indios. From then on, the term Indio became generic for natives. So when Ferdinand Magellan sailed and claimed the Philippine Islands in 1521 for Spain, the natives suddenly became Indio. Philippine-born Spaniards. During the Spanish colonization, the term Filipino was reserved for full-blooded Spaniards born in the Philippines. Insulares is a kind of Españolas in the colonial Philippines. Criollas were full-blooded Spaniards born in the Philippines. The other kind of Españolas in the colonial Philippines was the Peninsulares. They were full-blooded Spaniards from the Spain and sent to Spanish colonies to govern. Distinction of place of birth. Filipinos, despite their Spanish blood, were tainted by their place and birth and thus did not have the limpieza de sangre or purity of blood and race that placed Peninsulares in the upper crust of colonial society, together with the other Europes or non-Spanish Europeans. And that ends my discussion. Thank you for listening.
Upon reading the 1896 Philippine racial context of the revolution, I believe that we all should be thankful to our heroes for the sacrifices they have made and be grateful to the independence that we are enjoying right now.
The year 1896 was a very important year for all the Filipinos. This was the year of the outbreak of the Philippine Revolution and a year where the presence of Spanish in the Philippines had been around for 330 years. Before they came in our country, there was no Philippines yet. It was because of Spain that made the Philippines one geographic unit known as Filipinos. Were racial and social classes in the Philippines, which are the Indios, that became a name for the natives because Christopher Columbus mistook America for India and labeled red-skinned inhabitants. Mestizos, which were children of parents of different races. Peninsulares were full-blooded Spaniards born in the peninsula, and Insulares, and many more. During the Spanish period, Filipinos were full-blooded Spaniards born in the Philippines. Social classes may have been determined by race. Racial tension creates the origins of the Philippine nationalism, especially as there were discrimination of Philippine-born Spaniards and Peninsulares. It was only in 1812 Cadiz Constitution was drafted, and the very first time that it was granted rights by Spaniards to the overseas colonies. It made the existence of Filipinos known and official. However, it was revoked in later years. Filipinos started to raise their voices against racial discrimination, and before the 1896 revolution, there were already many revolts, but crashed and failed because this was seen as danger by the colonial authorities. Aside from revolts, the event of Cavite Mutiny, such as the imprisonment of many Indios and mestizos, including the boards of priests, and their death, were a life-changing event for Filipinos. This sparks the basis for national consciousness. It is when the Filipino natives started to see themselves as Filipinos rather than seeing Spain as their mother country.
Dumating na. Dumating na ang araw ng mga tunay na anak ng bayan!
The 1896 Philippine Revolution created a paranoia in the Philippines to fight for their independence. With this, racial discrimination and social classes were ended. The success of the revolution emerged the inhabitants of the Philippines of what we call now Filipinos.
De la Liga Filipina is civil propaganda made by Dr. Jose Rizal. Unestablished in June 3, 1892 from Elias Street, Tondo, Manila. In few days, Jose Rizal was secretly arrested from the Spanish because of La Liga Filipina might cause revolution to the Spain. Jose Rizal was imprisoned in Dapitan on July 6, 1892. The purpose of the organization is to unite the nation, help other members, fight injustice and equality, and education for the country. The organization consists of 3 councils: the Supreme Council, Popular Council, and the Province Council. In 3 councils, it is made up of chief, fiscal, treasurer, secretary, and members. First, the Suprema Consejo, they're the ones who manage and lead the organization. Also, the commander of the Popular and Province Councils. The Provincial Council is the leader of the Popular Consejo, and the Popular Council controls the members of the organization, duties of the members on the Liga Filipina. Members should pay 10 cents every month. Members shall follow the order of the chief of the councils. News regarding the Liga Filipina shall be reported to the Fiscal Council. Decisions from the council shall be confidential. A member will not help other members from danger shall be punished. Every member shall change a new name unless they are provincial council. Every member shall have a job. Every member shall not misjudge nor underestimate other members. Why Rizal made up the Liga Filipina? Rizal built the Liga Filipina to help the people from financial and education to the people who needs the support Filipino. Why the Liga Filipina did not last long? After Rizal was captured, the members split up because of different beliefs and way of thinking. And the Corpo de Compromisario was formed. They promised to help the La Solidaridad. First is the Indio, son of Walter Principali, family studied abroad
What
and
came
gained
before
new
the Liga
ideas
Filipina?
about liberty and justice. Second is rise of the Ilustrados, which is called the Enlightened Ones, returned as intellectuals. Third is a propaganda movement, association of nationalists who push to reform the Philippines. The motto of La Liga Filipina is Unos Instar Omnium, which means one like all.
Matibay ang aking paniniwala na ang ligang ito ang magsisimula ng pagbabagong nais natin. Layunin ng La Liga Filipina ang mapagkaisa ang bayan. Malabanan ang karahasan at hinustisya, mabigyan ng proteksyon ng bawat isa kung kinakailangan, at mapag-aralan ng reforma para sa bayan sa mapayapang paraan.
The purpose of La Liga Filipina was to unite the whole archipelago into one vigorous and homogeneous organization. The League was to be a sort of mutual aid and self-help society dispensing scholarship funds and legal aid, loaning capital, and setting up cooperatives. It aims to be a defense against all violence and injustices. But upon setting the League, the Spanish authorities realized that this is a threat to their occupation, and that was the start of the Liga Filipina's downfall. Even if it was established in Spain, it would still be unsuccessful because at the time, Spain was problematic due to massive conflicts. Some even led to wars. They don't have time to hear the cries of the colony. The most practical thing to do was for them to establish it in the Philippines. They were aiming for unity of the Filipinos at the time whom are residing in the Philippines. So, it was not susceptible for them to establish it in Spain, given that the communication before was very, very limited. It would be very hard for them to communicate their platforms, targets, and visions to their countrymen. Rizal hopes in creating the La Liga Filipina that it would put a stop to the abusive Spanish rule. He wanted to open the eyes of the Filipinos to the reality that they were being oppressed, and that is why the best option was to directly establish it in the Philippines rather than elsewhere.
La Liga Filipina was a circuit organization. It was founded by Jose Rizal in the house of Doroteo Onghong Coatilaya Street, Tondo, Manila on July 3, 1892. The organization derived from La Solidaridad and the propaganda movement. The purpose of La Liga Filipina was to build a new group that sought to involve the people directly in the reform movement. The League was to be a sort of mutual aid and self-help society dispensing scholarship funds and legal aid, loaning capital and setting up cooperatives. The League became a threat to Spanish authorities that they arrested Rizal on July 6, 1892 on Dapitan. During the exile of Rizal, the organization became inactive, though through the effort of Domingo Franco and Andres Bonifacio, it was reorganized. The organization decided to declare its support for La Solidaridad and the reforms it advocated, raise funds for the paper, and defray the expenses of deputies advocating reforms for the country before the Spanish Cortes. Eventually, after some disarray in the leadership of the group, the Supreme Council of the League dissolved society. The legal members split into two groups when it is about to be revealed. The conservatives reformed the Cuerpo de Compromisarios, which pledged to continue supporting the La Solidaridad, while the radicals, led by Bonifacio, devoted themselves to a new and secret society, the Katipunan.